Why did Nintendo skip 4K for the new OLED Switch?
And how can you make sense of Australia's streaming sports right hellscape? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. Hi there, welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists in a socially distanced manner so we can dive into the big tech stories of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and I'm joined, as always, in the virtual Vertical Hold studios by Alex Kidman, a man who's seated about 1,000 kilometres away from me just to play it safe. Alex, today we're talking about this thing called sports. Are you going to be okay?
Look, Adam, I think I will. I've been brushing up on all of Orange Cassidy's early matches, looking at Kenny Omega's work in New Japan. We are just talking pro wrestling, right?
Oh, of course, only the best. Only the best.
Then I'm set.
Well, Alex braces himself for disappointment. We're also joined this week to talk us through the sports rights streaming wars by a man who makes a living sitting on his ass watching television. Yes, it's the one and only TV Blackbox viewer advocate, Steve Molk. Steve, the grueling Tour de France is one of the annual sporting highlights in the Turner household, keeping us up half the night. Which sport cuts into your beauty sleep?
Yeah, not the Tour de France, though I do enjoy it. Hello, gentlemen. Look, honestly, I know barely more than Alex when it comes to sport, but there are some things that I appreciate, some stuff that I know. And I, for one, am looking forward to talking about Roddy Piper's great stint within the WWE.
I got a feeling I should have taken this week off and just left it to you two. I'm not supposed to feel like the odd one out here. It's Alex's turn to feel like the odd one out. I'm being impressed.
You want to talk about your real sport? We'll talk about pretend sport. Let's get on with it.
So, like I said, this week, Steve's going to help us navigate this fragmented streaming sports landscape, and we're going to talk about the upcoming Olympic coverage as well. But up first, Alex's contract clearly stipulates that he'll only suffer through a chat about Sportsball if he can also talk games.
Also, no blue M&Ms in the green room. I have to be strict on that.
Fair enough. Now, my vote for talking games was Daley Thompson's Decathlon on the Commodore 64, but I've been outvoted. Alex has pulled rank, and instead we've got longtime friend of the show, Byteside editor Seamus Byrne, to talk about what we can expect from the new Nintendo Switch.
Okay, so there's a new games console in town, and we're not talking here about the weird Atari VCS or indeed the Intellivision Amico, because instead this week Nintendo announced a new model of the Nintendo Switch, and I'm joined by Seamus Byrne from Byteside. Seamus, is this the 4K next-gen Switch Pro everyone was dreaming of?
Yeah, no, it wasn't. It is in
shortest
fact...
segment ever.
Yeah,
thanks everyone.
done.
Goodbye. But okay, seriously, what did we get? What did we get if it wasn't the Pro?
Yeah, so it... I'm so fascinated by the way the rumors even started around this whole thing, because it is definitely an update and an upgrade in certain respects. The key thing being, for handheld mode, your Switch now has an OLED screen. It's now 7 inches, perfectly the same body size, but now less bezel. So it was a 6.3-inch screen the first time around, and an LCD screen. So now prettier in that handheld mode. That's the big thing. More storage, 64 gigs built in. You get, this is where I feel like it gets weird. You get Ethernet built in this time, because apparently that just wasn't a thing they thought was important the first time around. And you also get better speakers in handheld mode as well. That's pretty much, and a better kickstand. And that is actually kind of useful. But again, it's like that is not when people were thinking we might get some kind of 4K processor upgrade ready for the excitement of a sequel to Breath of the Wild next year. That is not what this device is going to be.
Yeah, it feels to me like it's a very Nintendo kind of upgrade, because they've always kind of pushed this path of, we don't really pull next-gen tech into our stuff. We just pull what will bring us a profit in little incremental upgrades, although this is pretty much the only console gen of theirs where I can think where they've had 4 distinct models. They've always done revisions under the hood, but it's usually been maybe 1 or 2 at most.
Yeah, and this is the one thing that somebody caught my eye with this when I was debating it on Twitter. Like, I'm not super personally invested in the Nintendo ecosystem. I have a Lite, I have a Switch, so I've got both of the current sort of models. One from the very original, and of course, there was then a slight upgrade that they didn't even publicly announce, but you could tell based on which box you chose as to which Switch you were getting. But if they're actually not following their under the TV console cycle this time, but instead are treating it like the latest version of their handhelds, people have pointed out that, say, under the Game Boy era and then likewise under the DS era, that actually there were many, many small incremental upgrades to those handheld series. And in that kind of a context, maybe that's the way they're going with this, is the idea that the 3DS slash 2DS slash DSi, XL, all of those things, if that is the series that is soon going to fade away in favor of just basically having Switch for both handheld and under the TV modes, then it might be that Nintendo's feeling comfortable with the idea of saying, actually, next year we might release a Switch Pro, and it's just going to live at a different kind of a price point and be more focused about the under the TV thing. Whereas this idea of the OLED model and all that is almost primarily focused on being better for that kind of experience.
Yeah, it's a weird set of tech choices as well. Because OLED, obviously, you get better blacks, you get better color representation. That's the whole point of going OLED. But it's still only 720p in handheld, and you don't often see that with a 7-inch screen on a tablet or on a phone. If it's OLED, it'll usually be 1080p. If it's 720p, it's usually an LCD LED because they're cheaper. So it strikes me as this kind of weird balance. I'm almost surprised that they didn't say, here's an OLED Switch Lite, because, as you say, all the advantages are in handheld mode.
Yeah. And look, I'm just dialing up, trying to think, when did the PlayStation Vita first come out? Because it had an OLED screen. It's a bit smaller, but it was a 5-inch screen. It was 960 by 544. And that was literally 10 years ago. It was 2011. I feel like everything that is in and I'm actually kind of impressed they didn't even bother coming up with a Switch or something. They've just gone Switch brackets OLED model.
Switch O's are probably a cereal.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, they should release that. I bet people would buy it. That everything that is in these upgrades is technology that was comfortably available in 2017 when the Switch first came out. So I feel like it is, like you said, it's a very Nintendo strategy in the sense that it's like there is nothing about this that couldn't have been done 4 years ago. It's just now they can do it at a price point that means they make plenty of money for every console they sell, and they rely on the fact that they make games that no one else you can't access anywhere else, and people love their games. And if you just happen to be at that moment where you're ready to upgrade, then you should buy the new OLED model. Or if you've never jumped yet, well, hey, here's a nice little tasty new version of the console to go and get. And yeah, I can see why people are disappointed, but it also it really does. Now with this hindsight of all of the 4K hype, I can look at this and go, yeah, of course Nintendo did this.
Yeah, I don't know that I see it, unless your Switch is, on the verge of being busted, and I'm a little annoyed that they haven't really said anything about the Joy-Cons, because everyone's had some Joy-Con drift. But I don't quite see the upgrade picture. I agree with you. If you're buying a new Switch for the first time, absolutely, this is the model to buy. Although it's not cheap. It's like $540 from the 8th of October. I know that's technically, I think it's like $70 more than the regular price of the Switch, but who actually buys the Switch at the regular price? It's pretty much always on sale.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it will be that that'll be something to watch, right? If this comes out and there are retailers who almost by that Christmas window, it'd be interesting to see if it's ducked under $500, or something like that at the big W's of the world, who often will hit those discounts on these kinds of things. Because I really do have that fear in my head for the hardcore folks out there who just feel like, well, they want the best version of the Switch they can have. I am worried that they've got, a Pro in their back pocket somewhere that might drop, next year. And then you're like, well, is that really sort of, fleecing the sheep a little too hard in a sense? Because, and again, I'm not a big follower of
Nintendo
Nintendo.
loves money.
Yeah, they really do. And they're good at printing it when they want to. But there was a lot of talk around the footage of the Breath of the Wild sequel where people were kind of saying that the frame rate on that footage and the quality of it really did look like it was running on something that wasn't a Switch, like a current generation Switch. And that's those kinds of hint areas that I sort of just feel like, okay, well, there's the people who really watch this stuff closely. They know what they're looking at. And they felt like if that was actually being rendered on something that isn't a genuine Switch, then we're back into that classic bullshot territory of E3 where, I expect a little bit better from Nintendo to not go, actually, we're just going to run this on a PC emulation of a Switch so we can get really beautiful textures and quality that will never be matched on the device you own. That's getting a bit rich. And that's the kind of stuff that I worry a little bit about what they're offering up this year instead of a 4K model.
See, I figure they've had a lot of time to work on that Breath of the Wild engine and optimize the heck out of it. And I think I read it almost the reverse of where you're coming from. I think the existence of this OLED model suggests, there will not be a Switch Pro for some time. And in fact, it'll probably be whatever they totally replace it with the next time that they can go around and sell another online service and sell us, obviously, another copy of Mario Kart yet again.
Yeah. And look, I think it really is other people getting in my head about this stuff because having, my first reaction was very much the existence of this, exactly like you, that I'm like, 2023 surely is the earliest that we will see some other genuine upgrade model out in the market. So, it's then when other people have been going, well, hey, here's all the ways in which they might make that excuse for themselves. And I can kind of see that. But in my gut, I really feel like this is almost a signal to say, that whatever comes after the Switch is going to be, they're going to call that a new thing. I feel like that will probably still be following this trend of saying it will be a dual purpose kind of hybrid console, and it might essentially be a Switch Pro. But I think you're right that it will probably be presented as a next generation Switch. And in that context, they can't do that next year. It would have to be the year after that for them to really, get away with dropping this one at this Christmas.
I'll be honest, my absolute first reaction to this thing, the first thought that went through my head was, damn, that thing looks like a Dalmatian. I don't think I'm alone in this. Are Nintendo going after the dog-loving market at the expense of those of us who are more cat people?
Well, yeah, especially the way that the controller, when you've kind of got the version of the controller with the two Joy-Cons slotted into that thing, it always had that kind of puppy dog head about it. And you're right, now with this very white emphasis, maybe they're daring Cruella to come after Nintendo now.
Awesome. Well, we'll have to wait and see what other surprises might come with the new Switch. Thanks as always for your time, Seamus.
No worries at all.
So, Steve, that's the new Nintendo Switch, same as the old Nintendo Switch, sort of. I know you're a Switch owner. Are you tempted by the upgrade yourself?
Oh, it'll look very shiny, but I got to tell you, the only thing that's going to make me upgrade will be Breath of the Wild 2. If they force me, I will, because I am so hotly anticipating that new title.
I get the feeling, as I said before, I don't think they're going to be forcing anyone anytime soon.
It'd be big why I order in my house, that's for sure.
Sport, back to sport.
I'm hearing this little voice. Steve, are you getting that as well? We were talking video games, I think.
I'm being oppressed.
All right, so in California Games on the Commodore 64, on the surfing level...
Yeah. So speaking of the good old days, let's go back to the bad old days. Steve, do you remember the bad old days where if you wanted to watch all the major sporting events, you needed to cough up $100 a month for Foxtel? Now, streaming was supposed to be the savior. What went wrong?
Everybody wanted a piece of the pie.
Yeah.
That's the short answer. Everybody wanted in, and not just first-tier sports, but second-tier sports saw the opportunity to get a much larger, more direct access to their fans' footprint, and that meant that they could put a decent, sort of dollar sign on what their sport was worth, as far as that regard is.
Now, you would think that wouldn't matter so much in Australia because it's all AFL and cricket and that's it. But there are a lot of other sports with major followings. And I think...
the NRL, Adam.
Yeah. See, being a Mexican, I wouldn't have even thought to mention it. But also football, soccer, round ball, whatever you want to call it. Yep. There are so many different variations of it. And so many... Australia's such a multicultural country.
Yes.
But it seems like round ball fans are really paying the price for this fragmentation.
Yeah, they really are. That's probably the sport, if we look at it in a global sense, that has been most pieced apart and turned into everybody gets a slice kind of scenario. We're in a really interesting situation because also in Australia, we have the anti-siphoning list, which plays into this mess and absolutely stipulates where some games of some sports can be shown, i.e. only on free-to-air television.
So if I'm a fan of what I guess we can call disassociation football, if it's so fragmented, where can I watch which bits of which competitions?
Great. I feel like one of those guys. Remember back in the films in the 80s, there was the stereotypical bad guy that would be wearing the long trench coat and he'd walk up to you on the streets of New York and you'd go, "Excuse me, mister, can I have the directions to such and such?" And he'd open up the thing and he'd have this like array of watches on one side and an array of, it's like, what do you want, kid? What do you want? It really is a case of that. Which piece of the round ball game do you want to get? Because you'll either have to pay Stan or Optus or Paramount Plus when it lands on our plates next month, or Foxtel, KO, whatever you want to fall into there, or even don't have to pay for it for some games of the World Cup because that'll be on SBS.
Is the World Cup next year, I think?
Look, I think so.
Because it alternates. It's the between years of the Olympics, right? So, yeah, it must be next year.
The thing that we're caught on is that the 2020 Olympics are in 2021. So who even knows what day it is?
I'm not the man to ask when the World Cup is on, although I would have said and thought logically the World Cup is such an SBS property. Even I will watch the occasional bit of the World Cup, but I'll always just think to watch it on SBS.
Yeah, we always want to see the Socceroos achieve mediocrity. So everybody tunes in to see how they go falling out in the quarterfinals.
If Italy didn't cheat, we'd be doing all right. Don't even start me. If
everybody didn't cheat, we'd all be doing all right. Let me tell you that right now. Look, that indeed is a challenge. I think you're right. I think it is normally when the Winter Olympics land. So in that, because the Winter Olympics and the Summer Olympics always seem to parallel bounce each other. But there are all of these annualized, leagues and games that we like to participate in and watch. As I said before, if you want to get the UEFA Champions League or the Europa League, that used to be on Optus. That's now on Stan Sport. They gazumped them. That was a swift little move there by Mike Sneesby and his team. Optus Sports still have the English Premier League, but if you want to get domestic round ball football, you've got to go to Paramount Plus and Channel 10. 10 will have some of the games, but Paramount Plus will have all of the games. And most recently, that was on Foxtel, I think, and a couple of games on SBS. It's all over the shop, mate.
This is the first time that we've heard 10, Paramount Plus, whatever, doing anything actually worth perhaps paying for, isn't it?
Oh, look, from a sport perspective, yes.
I would have thought from an anything perspective.
Well, see, I reckon that's... When we look at our streaming services, without moving away from sport too much, it's the depth of the library that is the reason we shell out the coin, right?
Yeah.
And part of the challenge for particularly Apple TV Plus has been that their library didn't have a whole heap of back catalogue. It was only ever new stuff that they were building. And now that they've got to that first year anniversary? It might be second year anniversary now. It would be 2 years. They've built up a reasonable library, but then Stan have always built in. You've got Amazon, you've got Netflix, and what Paramount Plus brings to the table is, what was it, 20,000 episodes and movies at launch, and then a whole bunch of intentional stuff that they're making for the service. So the depth of the library, I think, is going to be pretty amazing. If it's going to be the only place that you can watch the Mission Impossible films and Die Hard, so that is enough for me to shell out my coin.
All Die
Because
Hard all
none
the
of
time.
those have ever been on a streaming service before or been in the $5 DVD bin before.
And the challenge is they're not on any streaming service right now.
Do you think, is it only going to continue to get worse? Because we haven't even mentioned other sports like tennis. We haven't talked about Amazon. We haven't talked about YouTube.
Well, there's no question it's going to get nastier. We saw, and full credit to Channel 9, because this is the 9 network. Their approach is, we want to get your thing and show it on all of our platforms. And now that they have Stan Sport, they want to go nuts and give you all of the things. So for Wimbledon, particularly Tennis Tragics, Wimbledon's on as well. They can only show so many games free to wear, because they follow that linear broadcast model. But you could jump onto, particularly week 1, when there's a whole bunch of games running simultaneously, and watch the match that you wanted to watch. So I think this is the advantage of streaming services in the sports space, when there are multiple games at once, or you just want to watch it when it suits you. The streaming services have got them locked away, but swimming trials have been locked away with Amazon. They're keen to investigate more. There's no question that Paramount Plus and 10 are going to be looking for more opportunity to pick up sports. Stan are now far more aggressively injecting themselves into the streaming sports market. And you're right, this is before we even talk about a major player like Google, who look, honestly, it's a gut feeling. There's no move on it, but I reckon that in 2 or 3 Olympics time, everybody will be buying the sporting rights or licensing the rights from Google, because they'll have picked them up to play them on YouTube.
So I'm going to annoy Adam here, because there's also a really interesting model
It's in
out
his
of the
contract.
US.
He has to do that too.
Yeah, totally. There's a model for this out of the US with what happened with the WWE. See, I said I'd get pro wrestling in here.
Well done. Well done.
Because Peacock, the NBC streaming service, paid them something like it's billions of dollars, literally billions, to essentially take over their entire pro wrestling streaming service. If you're in the US and you want the WWE network, you can't have it. You've got to get Peacock. And this is the other way that might go, that even those small codes, because as the regular listeners know, I don't know a damn thing about sports locally, really, but I know you can stream just the AFL or just the NRL, depending on your code of choice. Those getting gobbled up by a bigger service is the other play that we could see, Google or not.
Yeah, no question. And to date, Telstra have been a part of, kind of the way that they've bought into the streaming rights to pick that up for their customers. So if you want to be able to watch it on your phone while you travel, you've got to be a Telstra customer or pay Telstra for the NRL pass or that kind of thing. I think that's going to go the way of the dodo. I mean, of course, there's the model, particularly in the US, around their tier 1 sports, your NFL, NHL, Major League Baseball, that all have their own platforms. So you want to watch it, you pay for your NHL pass or NFL pass, and you can sit down, open up the app and watch anything on any of your devices. The problem for Australia is that we don't have the subscriber base to support the amount of money you need to pour into it to make that a possibility. So the sports are still really clung to the teat of, be it broadcast or streaming rights, to get the majority of their cash that spill into how they then keep the league afloat.
So all that money I've poured into my badminton streaming service is going to go to waste.
Well, it depends. If you're only streaming it as you are at the moment to a small sort of Sydney suburb, then yes.
So talking about the big tournaments and things like Wimbledon's a classic example. It has benefited, but also watching it on TV has benefited, but also been hurt by the rise of multi-channel.
Yeah.
In theory, multi-channel was great because they could show 2 things at once. And I think one of the first times we really saw it put to good use was when SBS had the Tour de France on one channel and the Ashes on another channel at the same time. And that was fantastic. That was like 12 years ago, whatever. The problem with multi-channel is that the broadcasters still can't get past this idea that Channel 9 is our real channel, and then Gem and Bozo or whatever the others are called are our fake secondary channels, right?
How easily you forget 9 Life, 9 Go.
How could I forget?
Mark my words, 7 Bozo is coming.
It is.
We invoked it now.
I should have copyrighted that. But the problem that they do, and I mean, I even see SBS do this with the tour, and this is what drives my mother-in-law mad because she's a tennis nut, like a Wimbledon nut, is in the middle of the night, they say, if you want to keep watching it, jump now from 7 to 7 Go or 7 whatever.
Yep.
And then later in the night, jump back again. So, and there's no way to tell you because she's got a Fetch TV, which is really good for almost everything, except how does it cope with that? Because they haven't figured out a way to work with PVRs to send those kind of commands. And then because the networks honestly don't give a shit. They don't care about viewers in that way. So in some ways, while my mother-in-law is like, oh, I've got to get Stan. It's like, oh, you could just use my Stan subscription. I'll log it in for you. It's not going to be a big deal. But
not listening, yes.
To her, it's the end of the world, right? But also, it's going to fix that problem for her of, I can't watch the end of that match because it jumped to another multi-channel in the middle of the night because they refuse to just say, all right, this match is on this channel and stays on this channel.
Yeah. And look, your mother-in-law is right. And that in part, if I can be this bold, is why the broadcast networks are sticking with running sport on linear broadcast TV. It's for your mother-in-law. It's because they're used to picking up the remote and wanting to see it on their normal, I'm watching TV
But she hates the viewer experience. They're the one she's catering to,
terrific.
and they're doing such a bad job of it, jumping between channels that she doesn't want to watch it.
Because go, Alex.
Presumably this is because they figure they can get away with it, and it may also be cheaper for them. I remember a couple of years ago, Amazon had the rights to a bunch of, I think there were Thursday night NFL games out of the States, but they only had the live, so they were streaming them.
Yes.
They weren't multi-channeling them or anything, but they were only showing them as live. They were not, that you couldn't
Holding
go, I want to watch that the day after. It's on Prime Video. No, you watched it live or you didn't watch it at all. And that's what linear TV does with a lot of this stuff as well. And I guess that's the other complicating factor for your streaming services.
I don't think that excuse would fly with 9 and Wimbledon, though.
Well, and this indeed is the catch, right? So this year particularly, they've obviously put a lot of energy into Stan Sport as far as this is where you can get all the Wimbledon games because Stan Sport didn't exist last year when they had Wimbledon. So the difficulty is they need to keep the people that are used to normal linear broadcast TV to watch stuff. So 9Gem is the place to watch it in the earlier hours of the night. And then, yes, at 11:50 something, they flick over to 9. It goes over to the 9 primary channel because 9 are still concerned about making sure you get to see the latest episode of Ninja Warrior because that's what's been running predominantly in that time slot, or the NRL, of course. So you've got that kind of bounce. To have the push towards Stan Sport, and 9 now somewhat, is that acknowledgement that 9 are saying streaming is not just for the future is now, but streaming is our future, but we're going to invest so much more in that experience for tennis fans, sports fans, our viewers, so that they can have the surety that they don't have to watch on 9Gem and then flick over to 9 proper. They can just start watching it on Stan Sport. Honestly, when the game starts, or even if they missed it by 15 minutes, just press play. Off it goes.
It is but is there chasing playback on Stan Sport? Because this is one of the things that annoys me about. I wrote a piece for the paper about getting my television reception sorted out for SBS so I could record the tour and watch the tour on my Fetch TV. And people are like, oh, you're an idiot. Haven't you heard of streaming? But if I sit down to watch an evening's cycling and I sit down half an hour after it started, if I've got the Fetch TV, I can jump in and then fast forward through the ads and catch up to live. But if I'm only relying on streaming, I can't do that. If I didn't catch it at the start, I've either got to start watching it where it's up to, or I've got to wait until tomorrow when it's on catch up. Are you saying that Stan Sport will be more flexible than that for the Wimbledon?
Let me just check. So here's an edit point. I thought that they did have them on playback, but I haven't gone looking.
See, there's playback, but there's chasing playback. Chasing playback is the idea of I'm watching the start while it's still recording the end. And streaming services don't tend to do that.
Yeah, again, my sports knowledge is very, very limited outside people hitting each other with folding chairs. But isn't that this kind of feature that KO kind of sells itself on? I can get, however, that from a technical viewpoint, it's actually quite a complicated thing because you'd have to have not only the stream that you are serving out to the great wider internet, but all the backwards pieces of it to speak of. Having said that, though, you can do that to a certain extent with Foxtel generally. If you're using their IP-based services, you can generally zip back a little bit. So I'd be surprised if that wasn't something that was just implemented at a technical level.
Yeah, look, I have had things a little bit confused. I do know that they have the games available to watch after the fact. I cannot confirm that they have jump in at the start, 20 minutes into the match and go back to the start of it. I can't confirm that they have that feature. And you're right, Adam, that's really the holy grail of how streaming sport or any streaming service, live service, fits in and competes with linear broadcast TV. Because you're bang on. I will needlessly record some programs on free-to-air television just in case I miss the start.
Yeah.
Rather than allowing me, or I have to leave my fetch on so that I can jump back. Here it is, I've got it recorded so I can play catch up to get to, as live again. And when streaming offers that feature, like chef's kiss, right? That's the win.
I have this mental image now, very old school mental image of you having a bank of VCRs, all just kind of clicking into motion.
Back in the day, I almost did.
Well, speaking of big event sports, of course, the big event that is going on that even I know about is the Olympics, which are weirdly still happening in Tokyo. And don't get me started on why I think that's a bad idea from a pandemic point of view. But they are happening, and I know we've actually had some listener queries on this. What's the state of play with stuff like multi-channel and 4K, and who's got the rights? Where are people going to be able to watch this stuff?
Yeah, it is gold for Australia in the Super Spreader event. I'm honestly, shocked and appalled, but let's push through that. Seven will be pouring every minute of their primary channel into the Olympics, except for the 6 o'clock news, and I think even Sunrise, but it will have a very definite Olympic blend. So you'll see.
So they'll turn Sunrise into the rising sun?
Hopefully Koshi will be out there and competing in the badminton for us. Who knows? I know that Seven have had a few digs at the Olympics now, and I don't know if you recall, I think it was 2 Olympics ago, they introduced an app, an iOS and Android app that had all of the channels that you could stream all of the things. And I think the first time they did it was free, and the second time they did it, it was a subscription service. And that did and didn't go down so well with the market, but it did mean that those that wanted to use it could access every sport, every game in the sport that they chose to watch whenever they wanted to see it. And this year, 7 Plus is doing just that. And they like to talk, even though it's a streaming service, they talk about streaming channels in an online sense. And 7 are going to be offering, I think it's nearly 50 streaming channels on 7 Plus, which to my count is more than the number of sports that exist within the Olympics. So maybe there'll be just a
possibly
picture of
more
some
than the
cherry
number
blossoms.
of athletes some countries might be sending too.
More than most people that will be sitting at events.
Yes. They've done this for a few years, and I remember the year before that, again, it was Foxtel that did that because it was the rights were spread between Foxtel and, 7 or 9, one of them. But so Foxtel had an app with 8 channels on it, and that was, I think, the first time we'd ever seen anything like that. We were going back maybe, again, probably about 12 years now. So people have come to expect that kind of viewing experience. Does it mean that they've stripped back the free-to-air multi-channel? Because it was only 1 or 2 Olympics ago that we got the first proper multi-channel Olympics where they took advantage of more than one channel. But now, if they're going to put it all on the streaming service, does that mean that the idea of a multi-channel, free-to-air multi-channel Olympics is kind of dead?
Oh, yeah, this is 100% 7's streaming Olympics.
Yeah.
They are all about getting you onto 7 Plus, which, by the way, you will need an account for. You will need to sign up. It's free, but you have to sign up and give them a little bit of your personal information to get access to it all.
My name's Steve Molk.
Mate,
1,
let me
2,
tell
3
you.
Credibility Street.
There are more than one of those accounts around, let me tell you. The difficulty for, I think most people will handle that all right. because 7 Plus as a service that 7 deliver is mature enough and has apps on enough platforms that most smart TVs, certainly Apple TVs, Fetch connect into it. All of the different places can pretty much access your 7 Plus content. So that's fine. The difficulty really is people that aren't tech savvy. Now, I'm not going to say that's always older people, but it's certainly an amount of them that are going to struggle with. But I want to see this sport, and there'll be the letters that come, right? They only showed 10 minutes of the kayaking.
Yeah.
How do I get to see more kayaking? I can't do the internet. My TV isn't connected to the internet, blah, blah, blah. And I mean, it's always been a problem. And when multi-channeling first came along, I think it was 7 went large in the 2000 Olympics where they had 3 or 4 channels devoted to Olympic content. And there's no reason why they couldn't do it now, except that it is way easier and way more cost effective for them to deliver all of that content via 7 Plus.
Might have been 2004. I don't think it would have been 2000, but yeah, I know what you mean. That they did go hard, and now they're like, yeah, sorry, Grandma, you'll have to figure it out for yourself.
I mean, the multi-channel scenario for a lot of people is a challenge in itself. Not least of which because we've had the regional channel changeover again in the last couple of weeks, and normally that's like a light switch on off. I was watching this channel on Southern Cross, and now I'm watching it on Win, as an example. But the big carryover that we at TV Blackbox has seen is that, do you know how many people in regional areas watch 9 Life? According to the readers of TV Blackbox, everybody does, because they have inundated us, asking us where did 9 Life go. In the switchover, Win haven't been able to show it because they still have a commitment to show the Sky News channel that they're pushing out regionally, and that agreement doesn't end till the 31st of July. So, talk about confusing, right? You get all of that sort of stuff playing in, and when it's a case of, well, what channel am I meant to be watching Wimbledon on? What channel am I meant to be watching the Olympics on?
Why is Alan Jones on my screen?
Oh, please, gosh. Who is this guy?
Who will clean my television?
So, Steve, you mentioned that 7 was kind of like 100% your home of the Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
Forgive my sports ignorance, but in my telco-obsessed way, I thought Optus were heavily invested in this particular Olympics as well. And obviously, they've got Optus Sport. Do they have a play in where people will be able to watch Olympics contents or quality or anything like that?
As I understand it, Alex, Optus had some really big plans to deliver the Olympics via 4K over 5G to, handheld subscribers and those sorts of things. 4K on your phone.
And Fetch TV as well, I think.
Oh, okay, and Fetch. Yeah. Well, that would have been great. But I think that since their plans were announced and since the Olympics have been pushed back a year, that they've just kind of quietly stepped away from that idea. And I don't think that's outrageous. I think that's saving them a bit of cash in the midst of what I think is possibly going to be the least watched Olympics in history.
Well, everyone's going to, well, no, not everyone. A lot of people are going to be at home.
Yeah, you're not going anywhere.
Yes, that is very true. And look, if you believe the promos that are coming out of 7, this is the most anticipated Olympics in history. I'm not sure how, except maybe to see somebody catch COVID during the 100-metre sprint.
But we've been waiting for it for 5 years. It's a long time since we had to wait 5 years for an Olympics.
Do you know how much I wait for the Olympics? I'm just sitting on the edge of my seat like a cat ready to pounce.
Well, that static sound can only mean it's time to wrap up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Steve for joining us for this week.
Who said that? What's going on? Where are my Olympics?
Even I don't know that, Steve. But what I do know is that it's time for you to face the classic Vertical Hold 3 questions, and I'm really looking forward to your answer to one of them.
So ready.
So, where can people find your work online? Where can they find your social media online? And the big contentious question, especially for someone who makes his living watching TV, which sitcom is the all-time greatest?
Oh, jeepers creepers. tvblackbox.com.au is where you want to read all about it. And the TV Blackbox and TV Bingebox podcasts are where you want to hear all about it. They're out weekly. At Steve Molk is where I operate best, or at TV_Blackbox if you want to catch the latest headlines from our kingdom. Now, the greatest sitcom of all time. I got to tell you, as an 80s child, there is a plethora of opportunities here. Do I go to Family Ties? Do I talk about Cheers? What's going on in my life?
Oh, Cheers.
Hey, absolutely. If I wanted to be bold and possibly a man with a memory as long as a goldfish's, I'd lean into Ted Lasso. just to tie up the little sport conversation we've been having.
Very contemporary.
On
Very
Apple TV
contemporary.
Plus.
Wow.
Jason Sudeikis, phenomenal. Season 2 is about to drop on Apple TV Plus. If you haven't seen the first, mate, get on it. It's so good.
It is exceptionally good. And I should also drop a note of thanks to Seamus, who you can find on Twitter at Seamus or at Byteside.com. And as always, you can find us online on Twitter at VerticalHoldAU, on the web at verticalhold.com.au, or via the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
And as always, thanks everyone for tuning in on a week when too much sport is barely enough.
Bum, bum, bum.
Don't forget to tell your friends about us and leave us a review on your podcasting platform of choice to help us spread the good word in 2021. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
And now, back to that discussion about Andre the Giant versus Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 3.
Cue fanfare for the common man.